There is something happening inside your brain right now that you cannot feel. No pain, no obvious warning, no moment where you stop and think something is wrong. It simply continues day after day while you go about your life completely unaware that ordinary habits you have maintained for years are quietly, methodically doing damage that scientists can now measure in extraordinary detail. This is not a scare story. I want to be clear about that from the beginning. What I am about to share with you is grounded in real science, conducted by real researchers at some of the most respected institutions in the world. And the reason I think it matters is not to frighten you, but because every single habit I am going to describe today is reversible. The brain, even after 70, retains a capacity for repair and renewal that most people have never been told about. But you cannot use that capacity if you do not know what is working against it. There are 5 specific habits that are currently destroying the brain health of millions of people over 70. Not rare habits, not obscure ones. Habits that feel normal. Habits that feel harmless. Habits that, in many cases, feel like rest, like comfort, like simply living the quiet life you have earned after decades of hard work. And by the time we reach the 3rd one, the one that research suggests most seniors do every single day without a second thought, I believe you will understand exactly why I needed to share this with you today. Let us start with the first. The first habit quietly destroying your brain after 70 is treating poor sleep as an inevitable part of aging. And I want to address this one carefully because there is a story that has circulated for so long it has become accepted as simple fact. The story that sleeping badly is just what happens when you get older, that waking at 3 in the morning is normal now, that needing less sleep is a natural development, that the fragmented, shallow, unsatisfying nights you have been enduring are simply the price of age. That story is not accurate, and the cost of believing it is far higher than most people realize. During deep sleep, specifically during the slow wave stages that tend to deteriorate most significantly after 70, your brain activates a remarkable biological cleaning system called the glymphatic network. This system, which researchers at the University of Rochester first fully described just over a decade ago, essentially flushes the brain of toxic metabolic waste products that accumulate during the hours you are awake. Among those waste products is amyloid beta, the protein that forms the plaques associated with Alzheimer's disease. When you consistently fail to reach adequate deep sleep, that cleaning system does not operate at full capacity. The waste accumulates faster than it is removed. And over months and years of disrupted nights, that accumulation leaves a measurable biological mark. This is not theoretical. The journal Nature published research demonstrating that even a single night of poor sleep significantly elevated amyloid beta levels in the human brain. Now consider what years of those nights do, quietly and without announcement, while you lie awake watching the ceiling at 4 in the morning telling yourself this is simply how it is now. It does not have to be. Chronobiology researchers, scientists who study the biology of time and sleep, have found that many of the sleep disruptions common after 70 are driven by habits rather than biology. Late evening light exposure from television screens and phones suppresses melatonin at exactly the moment your brain needs it to rise. Irregular waking times prevent your circadian rhythm from anchoring properly. Afternoon naps taken too late in the day consume the sleep pressure that should be building toward a deep and restorative night. These are not medical mysteries. They are correctable patterns. And fixing them is arguably the single highest return investment you can make in your brain health right now. Before any supplement, before any prescription, before anything else. The second habit quietly destroying your brain after 70 is chronic social withdrawal, and this one tends to arrive not as a dramatic retreat from the world, but as a slow, barely noticeable narrowing of connection that happens so gradually you never experience a single moment that feels like a decision. A friend moves away, a neighbor passes. The group you used to meet with stops meeting as regularly. Driving at night becomes less comfortable. The invitations get more complicated to accept. And bit by bit, the days become quieter, the phone rings less, and the weeks begin to blur together in a way that feels peaceful on the surface, but is doing something far less peaceful underneath. The science on social isolation and brain health after 70 is now substantial and unambiguous. Researchers at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health, tracking participants over an extended period as part of one of the longest-running studies of adult life ever conducted, found that people with richer social lives experienced significantly slower rates of cognitive decline than those who lived in comparative isolation, regardless of other health factors. The connection was not small. It was not marginal. It was among the strongest predictors of late-life brain health in the entire study. Here is why. Human conversation is neurologically demanding in the best possible way. When you are genuinely engaged with another person, following what they say, formulating your response, reading emotional nuance, managing disagreement, remembering shared context, you are activating neural networks that nothing else activates quite as effectively. The brain that is regularly required to navigate the complexity of real human connection is a brain that is being exercised in precisely the ways that preserve it. The brain that sits alone in a quiet house, comfortable and unstimulated, day after quiet day, begins to lose those networks through simple disuse, not because of disease, not because of inevitable decline, but because the biological principle that governs neural health is identical to the one that governs muscle health. What is not used is gradually lost. If your world has been growing quieter lately, that is not simply the natural shape of life at this age. That is a signal worth taking seriously. One genuine conversation with one person who actually engages your mind does more for your brain than a month of crossword puzzles. Human beings were built for connection, and after 70, that need does not diminish. It becomes, if anything, more urgent than it has ever been. Now we come to the third habit, the one I mentioned at the beginning. The one that research consistently shows the vast majority of people over 70 engage in every single day, often for hours at a time, in the sincere belief that they have simply earned the right to rest. The third habit quietly destroying your brain after 70 is prolonged, uninterrupted sitting. Specifically, the pattern of sitting for several continuous hours, in a chair, on a sofa, in front of a television, without meaningful movement to break it up. I know what that statement might feel like, because after a lifetime of work, after decades of being in constant motion, of being needed and busy and responsible for everything, sitting quietly without guilt is something many people over 70 have never fully allowed themselves until now. The recliner, the familiar program, the afternoon that asks nothing of you. These are not small pleasures. They feel like the reward at the end of a very long road. But what is happening to your brain while you sit there is something you need to know. A study published in PLOS One examining adults over 60 found that extended sedentary time was directly associated with thinning in the medial temporal lobe, the brain region most critically involved in forming new memories and one of the first areas damaged in Alzheimer's disease. And critically, this association held even in participants who exercised regularly at other points in the day. Exercise did not fully compensate for prolonged continuous sitting. The sitting itself was the problem, independent of everything else. The reason goes back to circulation. Your brain consumes approximately 20% of the oxygen your heart pumps, despite constituting roughly 2% of your body weight. That extraordinary demand requires extraordinary blood flow, sustained reliably, continuously throughout the day. When you sit still for extended periods, circulation to the brain measurably decreases. Over hours, that reduced flow creates conditions where the brain quite literally receives less of what it needs to maintain itself. What breaks this cycle is remarkably simple, and the research bears this out clearly. 5 minutes of gentle movement every 30 minutes is enough to restore circulation to normal levels, not vigorous exercise. Not a gym session, standing up and walking to the kitchen, stepping outside for a few minutes, moving through the house with any purpose at all. These micro breaks in sitting are neurologically meaningful in ways that science has only recently been able to fully document. The television is not the enemy. The chair is not the enemy. Sitting for 3 unbroken hours while your brain waits for blood flow that is not coming at the rate it needs, that is the habit to change. And it is, of all the habits on this list, perhaps the one most immediately within your control. The fourth habit, quietly destroying your brain after 70, is eating in ways that starve the brain while appearing to nourish the body. Ultra-processed foods, the category that now accounts for more than half of all calories consumed in the average American diet, according to research published in the British Medical Journal, are engineered to satisfy hunger without delivering the molecular raw materials the brain specifically requires to maintain and repair itself. Your brain is built from fat. Nearly 60% of its dry weight is lipid-based, including significant concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids, particularly DHA, which is the primary structural fat in neural membranes. When your diet is consistently low in the foods that supply these compounds, fatty fish like wild salmon and sardines, walnuts, flaxseed, and consistently high in refined vegetable oils, processed starches, and packaged convenience foods, you are delivering the wrong building materials to an organ that is constantly engaged in structural maintenance and repair. Beyond structural fats, the brain after 70 is also exquisitely sensitive to blood sugar instability. The dramatic glucose spikes produced by refined carbohydrates and sugary foods create inflammatory conditions in brain vasculature that have been directly linked to accelerated cognitive decline. Neurologists now sometimes refer to advanced Alzheimer's disease in research settings as type 3 diabetes, a name that speaks directly to the metabolic roots of what has long been framed as a purely neurological condition. The Mediterranean diet, centered on olive oil, vegetables, legumes, fish, and whole grains, has now been studied in multiple large-scale trials, including the landmark pre-dimed study conducted in Spain and found to significantly reduce the risk of cognitive decline and dementia compared with standard Western eating patterns. Not by magic, by consistently delivering to the brain the specific nutrients it needs to protect itself, sustain blood flow, reduce inflammation, and maintain the cellular machinery of thought and memory. You do not need to overhaul everything at once, but you do need to understand that what is on your plate 3 times a day is communicating something specific and consequential to your brain, and that the message many people over 70 are sending without realizing it is one their brain is quietly struggling to survive. The fifth habit, quietly destroying your brain after 70, is living inside a world that stopped challenging you and calling it peace. Mental comfort is genuinely wonderful. There is real value in routine, in the familiar, in the earned satisfaction of a life that no longer needs to prove itself. But there is a line between comfortable and unchallenged, and crossing it without noticing is one of the quietest and most consequential mistakes a person can make in the decades after 70. The brain operates on a principle that neuroscientists call neuroplasticity, the capacity to reorganize itself, forge new connections, strengthen existing pathways, and compensate for age-related changes based on the demands placed upon it. That capacity does not disappear after 70. Research from institutions including Johns Hopkins and University College London has consistently demonstrated that the aging brain retains substantial neuroplastic potential well into the 8th and 9th decades of life. But neuroplasticity is not passive. It does not simply happen because you are alive and relatively healthy. It is triggered by demand. Specifically, by the cognitive demand created when your brain is required to do something it does not already know how to do automatically. The crossword puzzle you have been doing for 20 years is not making new neural connections. It is using old ones. The television programs that follow predictable patterns, the books in the same familiar genre, the conversations that rarely venture outside established topics. These activities maintain a certain level of engagement, but they do not challenge the brain in the way that genuine novelty does. Learning a new language after 70 has been shown in multiple studies to measurably increase gray matter density in regions associated with executive function and memory. Learning a musical instrument activates simultaneous neural coordination between auditory, motor, and cognitive systems that nothing else replicates. Picking up an unfamiliar skill, pottery, woodworking, photography, a card game you do not know, a recipe that requires genuine concentration, forces your brain to build new infrastructure. And that infrastructure is not cosmetic. It is the biological foundation of what researchers call cognitive reserve, the surplus neural capacity that determines how long your brain can compensate for age-related changes before they become functionally apparent. Comfort is not the enemy of brain health. Permanent, unchallenged comfort is. The difference between them is the deliberate introduction of something new, something that makes you feel slightly incompetent, slightly uncertain, slightly like a beginner again. That discomfort is not a sign that you have done something wrong. It is the exact sensation of your brain building itself back stronger than it was this morning. So there they are. 5 habits, 5 patterns that feel normal, feel earned, feel like simply living, and that are quietly, measurably working against the very organ that makes everything else about your life possible. Poor sleep that your brain is using as an excuse to accumulate the proteins associated with the worst disease of memory, social withdrawal that is starving the neural networks that conversation uniquely sustains, prolonged sitting that is reducing blood flow to a brain that cannot afford reduced blood flow, a diet delivering the wrong materials to an organ engaged in constant critical self-repair, and a life grown so comfortable that your brain has nothing left that genuinely challenges it to rebuild. None of these are permanent sentences, not one. The brain's capacity for recovery, given the right conditions, consistently astonishes researchers who have spent careers studying it. Neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells, has been documented in the adult human hippocampus at ages far beyond what was once believed possible. The organ you are working with right now is not finished with you. It is waiting to see what you will give it to work with. Start tonight with sleep. Protect those hours like they are the most important appointment in your week, because biologically, they are. Move your body tomorrow before you sit down for more than 30 minutes at a stretch. Not dramatically, not heroically, just enough to tell your cardiovascular system you are still here and paying attention. Call someone. Learn something new enough that you feel uncertain while you are doing it. Look at what is on your plate and ask whether your brain would recognize it as fuel. These are not grand gestures. They are the small, consistent, unremarkable-looking choices that, accumulated over weeks and months, accumulate into something that absolutely no one would call small. They accumulate into a mind that remains yours. Clear, connected, curious, and capable, not despite the years behind you, but because of everything you now understand about the years still ahead. Your brain built your entire life. Everything you have ever loved, learned, created, remembered, and become was assembled inside it. After 70, it deserves exactly what it has always given you in return: your full and deliberate attention. Take care of it. Starting now, starting today.